Welcome in episode 6 of the Maine Celtics podcast. It's your broadcast duo, Brendan Glasheen and Chris Whitney. Thanks for joining the program. Thanks for finding us on the Maine Celtics YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe, like the video. We appreciate it. Check out the previous 5 episodes if you haven't done so already. Also, you can find us at mainceltics.com. This week's episode, we are recapping the first half of the regular season. The Celtics, through the first half, 11-9, sitting in 7th place in the Eastern Conference standings as we record on a Thursday afternoon. They hit the break, All-Star break coming up this weekend, Chris. They go to Birmingham out of the break, the New Orleans Pelicans affiliate. And our guest this week is Maine Celtics general manager in his second year as GM, third year with the organization, former head coach, Jarell Christian. We sit down with Jarell and discuss the ins and outs of his role, how his role has evolved with the Celtics organization, and who was the person of inspiration as to why Jarell Christian said to himself, maybe I can be an executive or work at the executive level in the NBA. Chris, the Eastern Conference is an absolute mess, and I mean that in the most loving way possible. It is a mess between 1 and 11. There is a 3.5 game gap for first place in the league.
Right now, Maine sits in the 7 hole, but they're literally only 2 games back at first. We touched on it kind of tiebreaker-wise, head-to-head with Indiana. It's technically a half game out of the 2nd seed. It's just a complete disaster. 1 through, like you said, 11. You can even bring those 13 seeds in. There's only a few teams right now that have the SOS signals going out right now.
Maine's last 14 games out of the break, 10 of them are on the road. 10. So they go to Birmingham, then we come back to the Expo end of February to host Westchester. The Knicks, who won the Showcase Cup down in Orlando, 6-14 in the regular season, second to last in the East. But then really the beginning of March is a tone setter kind of start to the month for Maine as far as how if they want to get a home court game in the first round or perhaps get a bye if they work their way to 2. Because like you said, Indiana is the current 2 seed in the East, and the top 2 seeds get byes, and the Celtics have a 2-0 head-to-head tiebreaker with the Mad Ants. So that's possible. And the 1 seed's still possible. But out of the break, Maine plays at Wisconsin. They are 12-8, 3 seed in the East. Another matchup with Osceola down in Florida. They're 10-7, currently the 4 seed. And then Maine also has a couple of matchups with College Park on the road in March. They are 11-8. Currently in the 5 seed. So there are just endless opportunities for the cream to rise to the top, and it's all going to work itself out based on how the month of March goes.
Maine's got to come out and they got to get that game in Birmingham to open up the season and get a little momentum. We touched on it. 11-9, they're 2 games over 500. They haven't gotten on that streak. They look good for 2 straight games. All of a sudden they come back and there's a stinker. They win 1, they lose 1. They haven't had that kind of rise that way going up.
But no one has, right? No one in the league has.
No one's
really.
with it. So it's Maine could go against these teams right now. Go into Wisconsin, get a sweep. Go anywhere. They go get a sweep. They're going to jump. You can jump in the standings 4 spots just with 2 straight wins. So it's going to be those things right now. They need someone to step up. It can't be JD just doing everything offensively, which we've seen a couple times. They're going to need a little help there, but they just need to get in a groove to get, a 2 or 3 game kind of streak going, and then everything will sort itself out. But they control their own destiny. It's just cliche, I know, and we're halfway through, but they actually do.
Yeah, the other 2 games I forgot at the start of March. So at Wisconsin, March 1st, March 2nd, at Osceola, which is a crucial game to split and have that tiebreaker kind of erase itself, and then 2 games at Delaware. And the Blue Coats are the first place team. Wow, Delaware is every year. They're in it. They're in it, and they're at the top of the conference, it feels like, every year. Showcase or regular season. They're 12-6. The key number is Maine's only 2 back in the loss column and only 1 win from evening that wins record at 12 wins apiece. You mentioned J.D. Davison, the identity of the team. 20 games in, 11-9, some ups and downs, as you noted. JD's been the consistent leader on offense, and I think what we found is there are nights where JD does have to be a scorer and go to the basket and attack, and there are nights now where he draws the defense in. He's making threes. We've noted that when we had our discussion with him on a previous podcast episode, where if he has to take the 3, he'll take it. And now he's got a lob partner in Kyler Kelly, so the deception of Davison averaging 20.6 points per game. That's highest on the team. And he's only had 2 games in the regular season with less than 7 assists.
And you talk about Kelly and getting that partner with him. He has the backcourt teammates with Peterson, Stewart, and now Wieskamp's here. We saw him last night, what he can do around the perimeter, get into the basket. But to have that big man partnership like he had last year with Kabengele and someone that he can go and send that lob up to, because when JD gets in the air, it's literally he hangs for so long. He has options. It's lay it in. It's put it down on someone's head. It's kick it out to the corner. But to have that extra lob when the help side defense coming over, and Kelly's just ascension here in the last 2 weeks we've watched has just been crazy. And the way he's playing right now, that's really big in a big man standpoint to have that guy underneath. But it helps because we've been so backcourt dominant for this part of the season. To start to get that front court to start coming into play to help that out, it's going to be something that could be a game changer here in the second half of the season.
Kelly's number 1 in the league in blocks. He had 5 more against Windy City. And I would add on JD, especially when Stewart's in the game, running the point, kind of running the show, JD's also proven he can play off the ball. So they do a little bit of everything. So that's a credit to Blaine and the staff for finding ways to just use JD. It's not just him at the point. He's had more ball handling duties this year, as we've noted. But now off the ball, you don't know where he's going to attack from.
Right. And before, that was one of the things where teams last year would attack him. Hey, we got to get the ball out of his hands, because he was that distributor where he was breaking teams down and hurting them that way. And then once they got the ball out of his hands, it was like, hey, stick with him. He's not a concern. He goes low priority on the defensive scheme level. Now you got a guy that's making shots, and he's going to make it from anywhere from the rim out to the 3-point line, the mid range. He's going to pull up, and he wants to take that shot. That was the other thing last year. Get the ball out of his hands, or get the ball out of his hands. He's not going to be looking to come back and get it because he doesn't want that shot. Now JD's going out on little hunting expeditions here and there, and it's tough to munch. And you'll see him coming off screens and the way he moves, and it's hurting the other teams because of his speed and the way he can get up. Having to chase him off screens, you go double, all of a sudden you got Drew Peterson flipping off from the corner. You got shooters coming off from the corner when their guy helps off on him. So JD's work away from the ball, like you said, is a big, asset to his game now that's just changed over the year, the year he's had now and the way he's progressed. But the other thing that I've noticed too is, on the road, JD may have had a little spell with an ejection, happens. Yeah. But he's a quiet guy, but he's got a great personality. And you can kind of see that leadership now and his mentality of he wants to eat is coming to the forefront now, to where he's getting a little more like, hey, I want that call, hey, I need that call, or getting a little more roughed up and getting in the communication with the referees, so that ejection to me wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it hurt the team overall, but that's starting to show where JD Davidson's coming into his own, where, hey, I'm going to be a leader, come after me. And he wants it now. It's not just I'm here. He wants it. And that's kind of the attitude I get from someone getting ejected there.
I think that's fair to bring up, because you see it all the time in the association where a star player picks up a tech and maybe it rejuvenates the team. There was an NBA game last night. Ty Lue got ejected in the Clippers-Warriors game, and it changed everything. Now, the coach is not playing, and you still have all-stars and superstars on that Clippers team, but they played without Kawhi Leonard. Paul George fouled out, and it elevated the team. It kind of gave the team a boost. So it's the confidence, it's the comfortability with JD that's jumped out. And just to give the latest tally now for Davison, last year, 44 games played in the G League, made 43s. This year, in 34 games in the regular season and showcase, 54 threes. And he's shooting 33%, which is up from last year. Last year was in the high 20s. So the percentage has gone up. The number of makes from three has gone up. All good stuff from JD Davison. Drew Peterson has also been on a tear really the last couple weeks. And there are games. There was a game against Motor City a week before the break where Drew didn't get many shots up. And then the very next game, fill in the stat sheet. And sometimes he doesn't have to shoot the ball to be impactful, rebounding, assists. Blaine Miller was complimentary of Drew Peterson after Maine's win against Windy City. Here's what he had to say.
But he can make with his size, his vision, his passing ability, he can make all those passes to the roll, to the lift, to the second side. And I thought he was 9 assists. He was kind of dicing them up, diming them up. They started inching out, and especially late, started just realize and recognize he could get all the way downhill and get to the cup and finish.
Drew Peterson in the regular season, Chris, 16 a game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting 42% from three. We had him on the post game after the Windy City win, and he said, I'm no longer the new guy. And we'll discuss some of the roster shakeups, but he's been here 2 months now. He's really has settled in.
He does it. He hits the glass. He's got his hands in the passing lanes. He works defensively. So he does those little things. So those points are just like bonuses. And literally, it's just how he's doing it is just a quiet level. Last night, he made some shots and all of a sudden you look and it's like, oh, Drew Peterson's got some points on the board. You're like, from when? But he does so many good things. But his veteran leadership, you can see that now, coming on the court. But him being in sync with the team is so big because he isn't flexible to where he can go no-look passes. He can get down the lane. We talk about his flexibility. He goes up for shots, hangs. It looks like his arm extends 3 more feet. He goes out and spins it around someone's back for a pass and stuff. So he's coming into his own, and it's tough. It's the G League, man, where the rosters don't carry over. You got JD and Tony Snell from last year coming in here. It's the same thing everywhere. That's why it's so impressive what Delaware does to stay atop of the league every year. It takes a little bit, and they don't get a long preseason. They get a week, and hey, here you go to games. Like, they throw you right out there. So it's, he came in the middle of early December, came over, and it was just one of those things where he needed a little bit of time. He's got it, and we got the new guys coming in too that might need a little time. And when they get clicking, though, Jarell Christian's put together one heck of a roster.
Drew Peterson's like Inspector Gadget. Like, you just don't know what he's going to do. He had 19 against Windy City, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, 4 of 8 from 3, 2 blocks, 2 steals, led the team in minutes, played 39 minutes. And it really demonstrates the bucket that can be filled at the G League level and when you get reps in the NBA. So you mentioned Walsh. Walsh got playing time, played 18 minutes against Brooklyn. But there was a moment last Friday where Drew went to the Boston game. Maine played Motor City Thursday, Motor City Saturday. Boston was home against the Wizards, and Drew didn't play. But when we talked to him after the game against Windy City, there was value for him to sit on the bench, talk to a guy like Hauser, 5 years in college. As we know with Hauser, he was out at Virginia, undrafted. Same with Drew, 5 years in college, 3 years at USC, undrafted, G League contract, worked his way to a 2-way deal. It's the same sort of trajectory that a guy like Hauser had. And Drew said it's been beneficial to get down there, even if I don't play, just to kind of pick their brains, especially on a night where it doesn't negate him from playing for the Maine Celtics, which he didn't have to miss a game for those things. Want to jump in again on Kyler Kelly in his ascension. We kind of discussed him. I hope this is sustainable. Like 73% in his last 5 games from the field, shooting better from the field than he is from the free throw line, which he's been better at the free throw line. Like, I'm talking like decimal points. But with Kyler, with even Banks, who I know that James Banks has been starting, Kyler's been starting. They're both top 8 in the G League in the regular season in block shots. So the identity of the team, it's back to what we discussed off the top. Defensively, the growth of those two, that tandem. And even last night with Sonogo, we're recording on a Thursday, day after the Windy City win, just the interchangeable parts of the big man position. Those two have been outstanding.
The way he's playing right now, speaking of Kelly, is just something that, like, he's become, he's more comfortable with the JD and the lobs going up, but he's attacking, he's being real aggressive going to the rim, but at the same time, now he's pulling up for a 15-footer. And it's, that's going to pull the big men like the Sonogos away from the rim. That's going to give JD lanes to go down. We saw that last night. He went down to the rim pretty hard, tried to break a backboard. And it's just, that's only going to help this team. And his ascension's been really fun to watch because it went from like, he was kind of in and, Banks and Kelly, they'd go in offense, defense in the middle of the game. It's, matchup wise, they're going, it wasn't real rotation, built that way. Now he's just coming up and it's almost like he's like, hey, this is my job. I want it. And then, Banks is his only real competition there at position. So now they're just battling each other, which is only good for the team because they're going to go in and no one's going to want to lose their minutes. So they're going to go out and they're going to work and bust it there. And they both work really hard in the glass. But Kelly right now is just sticking out right now offensively. And of course, the block shots.
Kyler Kelly, last 6 games, 15 points per game, 70% shooting. Before last night was at 73% in his previous 5. 4.3 offensive rebounds per game. And a night like last night against Windy City, what jumped out to me was he was in foul trouble, but that did not take away from his aggressiveness on both ends. Sometimes you think foul trouble is a bad thing, which in a lot of cases it disrupts confidence, it disrupts game flow, it changes rotations. Well, they give you 6 for a reason. And he used all 6 of them, but was still impactful with 7 rebounds in the game and 5 block shots. If you look at Kyler Kelly and what he did in college, he was 905 last year, started his G League tenure with Austin, Oregon State's all-time shot block leader. Like, this dude could block shots in the Pac-12 and was playing at a high level in Division I college basketball. So the comfortability, we keep using that word, but it seems they've hit a rhythm with their big man tandem. Mentioned the roster shakeups. We did not jump into this with Jarell Christian, who's coming up shortly, because these moves were still in the works. Joe Wieskamp last night was outstanding. 13 points, had 11 in the first half, blocked a couple shots, had a steal. He was really, to me, when he checked in the second quarter, Maine was down 14 at the end of the first, and he changed the energy of the game. And he was only a 28% three-point shooter for the season coming in with Texas, but shot 40% from three last year. He was a second-round pick in 2021. He's only 24 years old out of Iowa. They might have something here. And he's got some length, too. You mentioned size. He's 6'6". He's not just a 6'1", 6'2" guard. Gives them another piece on the perimeter. But if you play defense, you're going to help the identity of this team.
You know, and that identity, kind of the way they want it, the way you're looking at it, is matching up to where they play. You know, they're playing here in Portland, Maine, where you have the people of Maine and in New England in general. You know,
it fits the personality, right?
Yes. And the Boston Celtics have always been a defensive minded team. It's, you know, flipping a little bit right now in that kind of sense. But you come in and you hustle, you hit the floor, you block shots, you play defense. You could not even score a point, but those people in that crowd are going to appreciate that. The people watching home would appreciate that. But he comes in last night and it's like Drew Peterson 2.2. I mean, they sit there and we looked at it. I joked that how much they looked like. I was calling him his cousin. Like, they came in and he's that same guy, gets to the rim. He can knock down the open shots, but he's going to work his tail off on defense. And, you know, you wonder how it is coming into the G League, being a guy that arrives out of nowhere in the middle of the season. You know, what a better way to kind of get your teammates comfortable with you than going out and working your tail off in a game like that last night. And, you know, getting the block shots, getting the steals, getting on the floor, but then, you know, distributing the basketball and picking your spots too, where you're going to go and get some of your own as well. And I think, you know, everyone appreciated that last night. But when you throw him, Snell, Peterson,
Tony was good too.
Yeah,
Deflections.
I mean, you just watch. Yeah, I kept touching it. Tony Snell at one point in time in the third quarter kept tipping every pass that was thrown by Windy City. I mean, literally he tipped one out of bounds and they go to inbound. He tips that pass, steals it, and they're going the other way. He was all over the place. You know, and it's defense can be contagious. And when guys see the energy and the hustle, and I don't want to get Wieskamp in that, hey, he's the energy guy. No one ever really wants to be the energy guy on a team unless you've really reached it, because that just means you're coming in, throwing your weight around, going bonkers. You're going to try. You're the excitement guy. He's cautious in what he did, but he came in and he was kind of that energy guy last night. He got the defense going. Coach Miller switched to that 1-3-1. He's playing on a wing and they're rocking and rolling up and down the floor. You know, so it was just I think the timing with him coming in is perfect. You know, I'm heartbroken that Jordan Shackle's down with an injury.
Yep.
Like, he was my guy from the day we did media day, you know, but Wieskamp comes in, he's a little bit longer and he's going to give you that stuff that Jordan gave you. Maybe not quite the attitude wise of, hey, you know, that chip on your shoulder kind of guy like I felt Shackle had, and that was one of his good assets. But he was good last night. And, you know, you give him a week to get kind of acclimated to Portland, get acclimated to the system, and get acclimated to the guys. And the way this team is, they're all pretty close. It won't take long. And he's going to be a dangerous weapon that Maine has that people are going to have to deal with.
You hear it in pro sports all the time, clicking at the right time, and that could not be more true in the G League. If you just get in, and if you're playing the best, and you've got roster breaks, which who knows what that looks like by the end of March, if indeed Maine is a playoff team. But moving parts, and it took Peterson a month or so to get kind of acclimated, and they've got another piece here in Wieskamp, who is a veteran at 24. He's been on 5 G League teams, so he's been counted out, and he hopes to find a new home and more of a permanent home, at least in the G League with the Maine Celtics. It was a good night for the team and a good night for the man who made all the moves in recent memory, recently this week, and really for the entire season. The construct of the team, the man behind the moves, general manager of the Maine Celtics, Jarell Christian. We discuss his career in Boston with the Maine Celtics, his role in Boston and how that has evolved, and also his upbringing through the NBA G League. Here's the GM of the Maine Celtics, Jarell Christian. And we're glad to be joined by the general manager of the Maine Celtics, his third year with the Celtics organization, Jarell Christian, joining us on episode 6 of the Maine Celtics podcast. You know, it's nice to get you into a setting like this as opposed to seeing you on the bench and it's pregame. So I'm glad you had a chance to come on with us. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. Obviously, I love what you guys do. glad to be a part of it.
One day we'll turn you into a media guy. Maybe that's your look at all the media guys that work for Boston now. I mean, PJ Carlissimo's been around the building. Jeff Van Gundy now works for the team as a consultant. Ashley Battle, a good friend of both of ours. You're right-hand woman in the front office. So maybe it's in your blood to be part of this at one point in time. But you're doing a pretty good job with the basketball team. Let's start with the team. Up and downs here in the regular season at 500. The Eastern Conference is a maze, but we haven't had a chance to talk to you yet, Jarell. So recapping the showcase, you've made some tweaks to the roster. How would you categorize the season to date at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall we've done a really good job. I think with our guys, we knew coming into the season that it would be a different one than we've had in years past since I've been here. Obviously, in the years past, we've had some veteran teams. And this year, I think our average age on our team is about 22, 23. So we knew there were going to be some learning curves, and it was going to be some bumpy rides throughout the course of the season. But overall, I think we are exactly where we should be. We've got some habits that we've got to clean up. But I think a lot of that just comes with experience or inexperience. And hopefully we continue to make a push down the stretch here.
So, and we'll get into more of what your role is like and how your role has shifted in the organization the last couple of years. Because I think it's fascinating seeing how that's been done at the NBA level too, on a different level. But what was the decision behind going young compared to previous years? Any rhyme or reason to it, or I'm just curious?
Yeah, no real rhyme or reason. It was more so of just identifying some younger guys that we could see in about 3 to 4 years being NBA players. And that's kind of a different approach than what we've gone with in the past with guys who've already been in the NBA and who are out, who are trying to get back in. The Ryan Archie-Iaconos, Theo Pinsons, Luke Kornet, so the world, the kind of the ones we went after, Denzel Valentine. So those are the kind of guys that we wanted to go after in the past. But this season, we kind of took a different approach. Look at some guys that were rookies or, 1 year into the G League and, wanted to see if they could take that extra step. And I've talked to our team about guys who are on Exhibit 10 contracts. Can they make a leap to be a two-way contract guy next year? Guys are two ways. Can they make that jump to be an NBA roster guy? And some of the Exhibit 10 guys, can they make a jump to being on a EuroLeague team? So I just want to try to identify some talent younger in their career to see if we can strike gold, so to speak.
One of your young players in his second year on a two-way, drafted by the Celtics 2 years ago now, J.D. Davison. His ascension in year two has been very noticeable. He's getting attention around the league. Celtics fans have enjoyed watching him take the next step. Now, last year, this year, it's a tough lineup to crack in Boston, as we know, because there's a championship aspirations. But JD is still so young. He's only 21 years old. 1 year at Alabama. He's going to play in the up next game at All-Star Weekend in Indianapolis. What stood out to you most about JD and his growth? Quite literally his growth. He put some weight on in the offseason too.
Yeah, the thing I've appreciated about JD is just how comfortable he is. The thing with him is if you see him this year compared to last year, he's a lot more social. He's talking to a lot more people. He's more active. He's just having more fun, it looks like. And, I think last year was tough for him, coming out of college, being thrown in Portland, Maine, being thrown into a new setting in the G League. Not really with Boston a ton. So it was a lot being thrown at him last year. But I think he's adjusted. And, even talking to him, he just knows what to expect at this level. And he's fully comfortable and capable of dominating just like he has been throughout this season. So I've loved watching the maturation of JD. Obviously, he still has a ton of steps and ton of growth to go to make it into an NBA roster and on the floor. But I think he's trending in the right direction.
You are right about talking more. He came on a podcast. We had him on for 20 minutes. I couldn't believe how long we had him for as far as what he had to share. But no question, the comfortability has been noticeable. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he's assumed more of a leadership role, right? You mentioned the young team. Last year when you have Denzel at times running the point, more of a vocal guy, Kabengele, vocal guy, Kamar Baldwin, who just at points on the court handled the ball. And I know there have been moments where Blaine Miller has tried to use JD off the ball, but JD is at the controls with the ball a lot. And he really, being only one of two returning players, he almost had to figure it out to be a more vocal guy. Is that fair to say?
No, that's fair. And I think with that comes, like I just mentioned, us being a 500 team right now. with 15 games left or so. It's one of those things where you're kind of at the mercy of those young guys, and the success of your team falls on a Jordan Walsh who's 19, or JD Davidson who's 21, or DJ Stewart who's 22, and Drew Peterson who's a rookie. Obviously, he was in college for 5 years, but he's still a rookie at this level. So a lot of your team's success is going to fall on those guys being able to grow a little bit faster and mature a little bit faster and understanding how they can impact winning at this level.
I wanted to talk about your time as a coach with the Maine Celtics and before that. But first, you hired a new coach. The Celtics hired a new G League coach with Alex Barlow. Now at Butler, you hire Blaine Miller, who had already been in a different NBA organization with the Milwaukee Bucks, won a title. I think folks are becoming more familiar with Blaine now, but it's his first year in the organization. Like you came from a different NBA team to Boston just a couple years ago. How have you developed chemistry with? He's no longer a newcomer now, but last summer that had to have been a getting to know process from someone who had not known what Boston did.
Yeah. And I would say the one thing that Blaine already had that fit right in with the Celtics organization is that championship DNA that we had talked about. Just coming off of a recent championship in Milwaukee, he already understood what the expectations were and what the standards were for success at the highest level and what that looks like and what it doesn't look like. But I would say his biggest hurdle is just learning the G League, the ins and outs. There's so much roster change. There's so many players going up and down. You don't necessarily see that with your rotation guys at the NBA level. So at any given night, you could have your two ways and assignments. At any given night, you could be going against a team without those, and you still have to find a way to make it work and galvanize the group and motivate them. When it may appear that on paper, the team that you're playing against doesn't have as much talent. And so I think that's the beautiful part about this league is as a coach, it keeps you on your toes. You always have to be ready for a curveball, and you have to be ready to adjust on the fly. A lot of those times we don't really get the word of who's in and who's out at this G League level until 60 minutes before tip-off time. And so you have to be ready and prepared for all things.
Asante Gist, does that name ring a bell?
Asante just came in off of a flight from New Jersey, I believe it was, and got into the arena at 5, got his physical about 5:30, 5:45, met his teammates at 6, and was probably playing 25-plus minutes for me that night.
Yep.
I believe it was probably against the Nets or someone of that nature. So he came in and played well and produced.
So that was during the challenging COVID year where the 10-day COVID hardship contracts were going around. That was my first year ever being part of the G League, and you were great. I enjoyed you're a great guy. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the years, but just that whole process of getting there at 5, I think there was bad weather that day too, because of course there was.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, this is the NBA G League right here. Like that's the G League experience. And that's when guys like you had mentioned, Pinson, Kornet, Archidiakono were getting opportunities to go play NBA games. But I was like, wow, I was blown away. And Asante Gist, God love him. I'll never forget him because of that. And he actually played pretty well, if I remember correctly. He came right in and gave you some good minutes.
Yeah. Like I say, that's the good thing about this league is, you never know who's going to be in and who's out. But it also gives those guys an opportunity to showcase that they can play at this level, and I think that's one of the perks of being in the G League.
So like we had said, if you aren't familiar, folks, Jarell was the head coach of the Maine Celtics 2 years ago. That's how you got your transition to Boston, leaving the Wizards. You were at Capital City as the head coach there. So now you're the general manager. So I'm curious, what was the process like in discussions with Boston to become the general manager? Had you ever considered that before that came about?
So in typical Brad Stevens fashion, he's a visionary. He sees things before they happen. He's a tactician. So even when I was interviewing to be the head coach for the Maine Celtics, he asked a question. He said, if you never coached again, would you consider being in the front office? And at that point, I'd never thought about it, didn't even cross my mind, wasn't even interested. And he said the only reason he had asked me is because he had never thought about it until someone asked him.
All right.
So once he said that, he kind of put the bug in my ear, so to speak. So, years later, when he comes to me with that opportunity, it's one of those things where, it wasn't fresh. I had some time to think about it, but it did two things. It gave me an opportunity to be in Boston full time and continue to build relationships with Joe and his staff. And that's kind of what prompted the move.
It's funny because my next question was going to be about Brad and what have you learned from him? And he only knew coaching. What kind of advice did he give you, at least when that opportunity did present itself? So 1 year of coaching, then it actually becomes available. Because what have you learned from Brad? I guess is the easy way to put it.
Be yourself. Be yourself. He and I are both guys that are obviously coming from coaching into the front office, into the evaluation realm of things. And, I don't want to go out there and try to be a Sam Presti or Will Dawkins or any of these other guys that are great GMs in there, right? But I want to just go out there and do it my way. I'm gonna just like I talked about with our team. I'm young. I've never really done this before, so there's going to be some hurdles that I have to overcome, and it's going to be a learning curve. But the thing that I do appreciate is that I do have a guy like Brad Stevens who's gone through similar steps. That I can always go to his office or pick up the phone, and he's always open to giving advice and things of that nature. So the biggest thing I've taken from him is just, don't be afraid to fail. Make sure you do your homework. Make sure the guys that we're bringing in are, high quality, high character guys. And then be yourself. Don't try to be anybody else.
I really appreciate and admire that answer because I think going back a few years now when Brad got the president of basketball operations job, I think Boston fans were inquisitive, not because they didn't think Brad could do it, but they're like, well, wait a minute, he's never done this before. So just to hear the honesty behind the scenes, like it starts with that conversation of just being curious. And like you said, I think what's very true about Brad Stevens is he just continues to be Brad and he hasn't changed. You notice in interviews with the press before practice or after a trade deadline, a summer press conference, no matter what the circumstance might be, he hasn't changed who he is. So, and I would say the same about you.
One thing with that is, even, if you watch Brad at a Celtics pregame, he's got his khakis on and a pullover or a quarter zip or something. And then you see all these other GMs, they've got suits on. It's just, that's something I've taken is I'm going to be myself. I'm not going to try to be anybody else. I'm going to wear what I would normally wear. I'm not going to try to put on a facade, but I'm going to be the true essence of myself. And, what you see is what you get.
But you don't have your hat on for the podcast. Is that because you?
I've got a couple here. Which one do you want?
No, it's cool.
Attitude. Yeah.
I'm trying to hold you to your standard of being yourself, and normally I see you with a hat on, so it's.
They're all here, fresh shave. I wanted to look good for you this morning, so here we are.
And Brad might be one of these people, but I'm curious, who are some of your current or past mentors, kind of along the way for you?
I would say the biggest one would be Mark Daigneault, who is the head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder right now, who's also a Massachusetts native. Leominster, I believe, is where he's from. So he's a guy that I got my start with at this level of professional basketball. When I was a G League assistant in Oklahoma City, Mark Daigneault was our head coach. So I worked with him closely for 4 years. And the thing I've always taken from him is he's just a tremendous leader. He's a tremendous coach. And he really believes in the player development component of getting success. And I think that's something that's stuck with him from the day I met him. He's always talked about being able to develop people and players. So it's no wonder why they've had, such success in the West like they have.
They've been unbelievable. And you mentioned Sam Presti. I'm not sure how someone could handle having that many draft picks going forward. I mean, that seems like a popsicle headache waiting to happen, but it's probably a good thing just to have them and see what you can do. But yeah, they've had a phenomenal year. Yeah. And they gave Boston a hard time, but they've built that well. Yeah,
they play extremely hard. They make shots. They play at a fast pace, but also they're organized. And teams that I think that can play with pace and also get organized in the crucial moments of the game, they're always going to give themselves a chance to win. And that's something I think, Oklahoma's done.
Simple one. Do you miss coaching?
Absolutely. Every day of my life.
Yeah.
Every day. I mean, it's just more so of not being with the guys, not being in the huddles, not being in airports or buses with the guys, with the team. I feel like you lose that connection sometimes. Obviously you can text with guys, you can talk to them on the phone, but you actually being, in those huddles at crucial moments, you actually being there, I think it gives you, it's we always talked about sweat equity as a coach. The coaches who are out on the floor, working hard, sweating with the guys, putting their body on the line, just like the players are. Those are the guys that the Phil Handys of the world are always the ones that people look up to and have the most respect from the players. Where in the front office space, it's more of, you're watching from afar. You're making moves and deals behind the scenes. And it's just, you feel isolated at times in this front office space, I found.
Love it. I feel like that can go either way with some executives now. I'm good. I like this life. I don't have to worry about the less sleep. There's more, I don't know, like just the day-to-day grind.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the lifestyle's completely different, especially for me,
Yeah.
So me having a wife and 3 kids, I'm home a lot more. When you're on a coaching staff, you're traveling 3 times a week in and out of town. Everybody's kind of operating off your own schedule. So it's tough. It's challenging for a family. But for me personally, I loved it. And hopefully one day, who knows when that'll be, I'll be able to get back into that space.
Yeah, I would say the 3-hour round trip, Boston to Portland, you're humbled. You're like, okay, this ain't bad compared to some of the cities you're going to in the G League, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So on the subject of what your role is like, Jarell's at every home game for the Celtics. And then last year you were traveling with Boston. Your role has evolved over the years. You're a jack of all trades. And that kind of goes back to what you said about Brad and just allowing you to be yourself and where you see fit, which I think the flexibility is fantastic. Your role, it might say general manager, but so much more is entailed. So what is a day in the life for you like now that you're not coaching? And off of that, as you know, and we just, Asante Gist was an excellent example of a rewarding experience where you give someone an opportunity, you crack an 8-man lineup, you need 8 guys to play. And as a coach, you're probably looking at it going, as stressful as this day was, it's pretty cool. He's getting an opportunity like that. While it can be rewarding, in your spot, it's a difficult business to manage because you have to make some tough decisions preseason, in season, whatever it may be. So what's that day in the life like, and what's been your approach to that word that we hear a lot, connecting with guys?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I've taken from my 1-year head coach stint in Maine was one of our 3 core values was honest communication. And so even with our players now, I'm always honest with them. If they come to me and say, "Hey, what can I work on?" I'm going to give you the brutal truth. And even when there are situations being brought up and teams are inquiring about players, and I'm open and honest with their agents. There's a number of teams, there's a number of guys that, have garnered interest across other teams across the league. Rightfully so, and like you said, the hard conversations are hard, but you don't have to be bad at making those decisions. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about being in this role, is that I'm able to communicate with the players and agents from a coaching standpoint. I understand how a player is going to come in and impact winning with our group of guys because I know how our coaching staff is going to use them because I've been in that seat. I also know when things aren't going well and there needs to be a change, probably a little bit sooner than other people. And the thing that I've really appreciated about Blaine and his staff is that they've been great. They've been phenomenal in being able to build relationships with the players. But for me in this space, the day in the life is, it's a lot of film study. It's a lot of talking to our analytics department and trying to find the next diamond in the rough in the G League that, may not be performing as well in a certain situation, but leading up to this year, they've been playing well. And so it's a lot of film. It's a lot of conversations with Remy, who's had this position before me. It's a lot of conversations with Dave Lewin and trying to get people that we've identified in the past to be a part of our organization now. And so that's kind of prompted a couple of our most recent trades and transactions. But the day in the life is a ton of conversations with agents, a ton of conversations with our medical staff, a ton of conversations with our coaches, but also, again, watching a ton of film. I'm also a pro personnel scout with the Boston Celtics. So I have 2 divisions. I've got the Atlantic Division and the Southeast Division and their G League affiliates. So I have to watch all those games. And as you can imagine, it's nothing but watching film, almost all day, every day until, midnight at least.
And no need to name anyone specifically because this is more of a general question, but what is as a follow-up to that, the next diamond in the rough? And maybe it's you get a player directly out of college because it's a second round pick, or there's a player who maybe didn't shine right away out of school and you can get him on a G League deal. What's the gauge of age? Of course, matters to this too, I would think, and experience, but how do you gauge patience with guys? You follow me? Like if you've got a player who's been with 3 different teams, what's again, without giving a number, just more, how do you gauge patience with different guys?
Yeah, I think the one thing, like we've always kind of talked about, like that sweet spot for guys, between ages 25 to 28.
Yeah.
Is kind of where we see the biggest steps in their growth and development and kind of who they are. After 28, I'm 37, so it's weird for me to say after 28, we almost feel like you're declining as a player. But, we find that 25, 28 range being the sweet spot. But in terms of being patient with some guys, and I think it's really just evaluating how they can impact the Boston Celtics in the long run, and a lot of it is about role and fit, but also a lot of it is, environment. What culture are they in right now? What environment are they in right now? And if we threw them into a Boston Celtics culture and environment, how would they fit and how would they transition?
Mm-hmm. And that's a great transition because just take this and run with it. Jarell was the head coach when Luke Kornet was in Maine and Sam Hauser was in Maine. And that was a fun year. It was my first year in the league, and I was blown away by the competition. But just the players that we had on the team, Chris Clemens, who we saw recently with Windy City, had some historic performances. But just the overall mix that year with Kornet and with Hauser, how gratifying is it to see both of them impacting winning at the NBA level?
It's special. It's probably one of my most prized moments as a coach, to be honest with you, just because those 2 young men came to work every day, put their egos aside, and just understood what the assignment was. And the thing that I've always told everyone that asks about those 2 in particular is what they're doing in TD Garden is exactly what they were doing in the Portland Expo. They didn't try to do anything any different in Maine. They weren't trying to work on their game in terms of going isolation or proving that they could do anything different. They just accepted their role, and they exceeded at that, and obviously they got rewarded. But it's another thing. It's a testament to, my staff that year, Alex Barlow, Avi Story, Craig Lushnot, like those guys understood how those guys could get to an NBA team and how they could have the most success, and they stuck with it. They didn't deviate from the plan from day one. But again, Sam and Luke are 2 of my favorites, and it's for that reason.
Man, you aren't kidding, because I'll watch a game now, more so when they first started out. And of course, Hauser's role, more minutes, and with the center position, guys in and out of the lineup, Kornet has had his opportunities. But you're not kidding. I'm watching. I'm like, this is exactly what Luke looked like in the Expo. And no more, no less, just kind of steady Eddie. Not to say he wasn't working hard on different nights, but it's unbelievable. I watch, I'm like, wow, this connection. And you used to say this to me, the connection between finding a player to come play it in Maine on a G League deal, and you have that window and you say, okay, we want them, or the hope is we can identify a player who can be in the NBA and help the Boston Celtics win games. And those 2 have done exactly that to a T. When I see Luke go set a screen, or when he's rotating off ball defensively, it's like, this is exactly what we saw in Maine. So it's kind of crazy. It is kind of crazy, and you're spot on about it. And I think
the good thing about all that is that we've got those 2 guys to kind of use as the blueprint. We can use those guys as examples for the team this year. And I would say Jordan Walsh would be a great example of that. Those 2 guys, like I just mentioned, Sam and Luke, were doing exactly what their role would have been with the Boston Celtics when they're in Maine. So I think it's tough for, a guy that's 19 coming out of college to kind of understand that. Obviously you come to the G League and, you're a draft pick, and the expectation is to dominate and kill and do all these things. But my communication to him has always been, your success isn't determined on what you exactly see in a box score. Can you be the best defender on the floor? Can you give maximum effort? Can you get out in transition? Can you offensive rebound or at least attempt offensive rebound? Those are going to be the things that you're going to have to do playing alongside Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. So his development is coming along nicely. Obviously, it's it was probably tougher for him to hear some of that at times. But to your point, that's what Luke did. That's what Sam did. Those guys didn't try to come out and do any more, any less. They understood the assignment and they excelled at it.
And Jordan has said that, and he said that in Boston after a game. He said that to us in Maine after a game or before a game. He's coming along, but yeah, you're reminded he was in high school a year and a half ago. Kind of on that same track though, you mentioned Sam Hauser was in college for 5 years at Virginia, undrafted. Now he's on a NBA contract, was a two-way, then went on an NBA contract. And that's kind of the same blueprint. And Drew Peterson talked about this the other day after being in Boston. He's picked the brain of Hauser, and Drew came to Maine later in the year. He scooped him up from Sioux Falls. He was on a standard G League deal. You awarded Drew a two-way. Is that fair? That path is kind of how you see Drew maybe seeing fit?
Yeah. I would say the comparison of those two as players is not as accurate. But the pathway and trajectory is probably fair. The one thing that Sam doesn't get enough credit for is a couple things, actually. His IQ, his feel for the game, and defensively, he understands where he needs to be every possession, on ball or off ball. And
that's why he's on the floor, right? Like exactly. I think people understand that. He's not getting the minutes he's getting now if he can't be a reliable defender.
Exactly. And that's something that we talked about while he was in Maine, that we had to clean up a couple things early, but he obviously got those things into live play and was able to execute. But the other thing that Sam does well is if he doesn't have a shot, if he doesn't have a drive, he makes 0.5 quick decisions. And so you can play alongside anybody. When you've got the capability to shoot the three as well as he does, but you also have the IQ and the self-awareness to get off of the ball when you don't have a shot, I think that's elite. And that is what makes him a good teammate or a good piece for Boston, because the ball doesn't stop, the ball doesn't stick when it touches his hand.
Right. I think with Drew, you notice this a lot too at USC, unselfish as can be, almost to a fault sometimes, how unselfish he can be, because sometimes it's not a 0.5 decision. So while you might look at a box score and go, he had a couple turnovers. Like some of the turnovers you can remember watching the game and doing the game, you're like, well, he had the right idea. He's trying to share the ball. So that comes with time, right? I think also adapting to a system mid-year as a two-way, it's a tough ask too. And that's just part of the grind of the league.
And that's something with not just, Drew, but a lot of younger players in the G League is those guys want to show that they can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And my conversations with him have been, sometimes you have to show that you can do a little bit of everything. Just do one thing or two things really well. That's going to translate to the next level. So it's been a good moment for me in communicating with Drew, because he's open, he's receptive, he's very coachable, and he wants to do what the coaching staff wants him to do to help him get to Boston. So that's the thing I love about him.
Love it. We'll get you out on this. Really appreciate the time. This is good stuff. Good behind the curtain stuff on how the intricacies of the league and how it all sets up blueprint wise to the NBA. What do you see next? Just as a fan, as a coach who got started in the G League, as you said, with the Oklahoma City club and Capital City, what do you see next for the G League? Like what's next in Jarell Christian's eyes to keep the league growing? Yeah,
I think obviously this is the first year of having the 3 2-ways. I think we're going to see that for a little bit, probably 2 or 3 more years, and kind of, see what that looks like. But I could also see them adding more teams, and in some different markets, to maybe test it out to see how it does before they move maybe some NBA teams to that market. So I could see that happening in the next couple of years. But I do like the trajectory. Obviously, I got to sit with the president, Sharif, a couple games ago, and he was excited about the talent pool that we have in the G League, and kind of the amount of people that have played G League games or G League minutes that are now impacting NBA teams and rotations is special. So I think we're on a great path as a league. But like to your point, there's always going to be a curveball that they throw to see if it's going to be able to, roll uphill and in some way stick to the NBA teams.
Jarell Christian, general manager of the Maine Celtics, also works in the scouting department with the Boston Celtics. Thank you very much for the time. This was great.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon.
All right. Many thanks to Jarell Christian. Really good stuff from Jarell, who he gets petrified when he wants to come on the broadcast. I'm like, you're good at this. Like you've got this down, man. Like you can do this. But he likes to defer to Ashley Battle, his assistant GM, or Remy Cofield, or even DeJuan Eubanks, the Maine Celtics president. He's come on the air with us. So Jarell was great, really good stuff. And he brought up an excellent point. I forgot. I'm glad he went there. He brought up Mark Daignault, who's the head coach of the Thunder, and the year OKC has had. Jarell was under Daignault in Oklahoma City when Jarell got his start with the Oklahoma City Blue, G League affiliate of the Thunder. Let's wrap this up. We hit this off the top. 10 of the final 14 games for Maine are on the road. So we're going to be doing a lot of watching like the people will do. We'll be tuned into wherever the game is, ESPN Plus. Most notably, Tubi will also be an option for us depending on the schedule and what the broadcast plan is for those games. Chris, give me a key to the second half. Really, final 14 games. They've played 20 of them, so 14 to go. What to you is important for the Celtics to work their way into a playoff spot?
It's going to be a couple things. One, we can't be relying on one player. It's going to have to be good ball movement, basketball, team wise. Use the big men underneath. Work outside in. You can do that. They're going to open up the lanes for our guards and outside shooting lanes, but it's all going to come back defense, defense, defense. And if this team plays defense, they're really successful, but you can't play defense and then watch buy a ticket and watch JD Davison at the other end, like the public and everybody else at the stadium's going to do. You got to sit there. We're going to play good, hard team basketball offensively, but it's going to be work on the defensive end. Take off that Wieskamp showing last night. Just do the little things like that. And if we can get through that, I think it's going to be whoever plays the best defense in these last few games for all these teams to get that spot. But Maine's got to come out and play team defense, but they got to play team offense at the other end to match it.
Yeah, and Blaine Miller has said this time and time again, defense turning into offense, and that was on display against Windy City. Joe Mazzulla has said this in press conferences, and he's said this at the NBA level, and it's the same message to the G League team. The amount of 25-point opponent quarters, and that happened last night. Maine. So there have been moments this year where Maine starts very well, particularly on the road, and then it sort of unravels in the second half. Well, you go down 14, you allow 36. They answer with, these are their final three quarters scoring defense, 23, 22, 21. So kind of off your point, it can't be one guy. I would also add, don't be predictable. And last night was an example of not being predictable through a different defensive look. Great insight from Drew Peterson on the postgame. They had just installed that 1-3-1 defensive look. And so now I'm curious, personnel matters and who's available matters, and that's hard to determine in this league based on a Jordan Walsh going to Boston or Neemias Queta, who's been in Boston for mostly the entire year. Who you have matters, but yeah, I think just not being predictable. And then on nights when they don't shoot well, how do you guard? And they had 11 blocks last night. Just using recency bias is a real thing, admittedly.
And closing, you're talking about closing out this podcast. It's closing out games. You can go back right now. Maine's probably sitting close to first place if they just close out 2 or 3 games on the road or even a couple at home. They've had big leads that evaporated and they end up losing in the fourth quarter. And that big lead was also in the fourth quarter. They have those. They're up in the top of the charts right now, the standings. And that's where they should. This team belongs there. You and I have now seen a lot of these teams. Maine is an upper echelon team in my opinion. And I'd love to see him get that home playoff game again. But it's like you said, it's going to come out, close the fourth quarter, play consistent defense, be consistent, and go on a little run here, getting some wins racked up in the win column.
Yeah, and I would keep an eye, too, on the rebounding. Maine's been an elite offensive rebounding team. They're climbing the ranks slightly out of that bottom third of the league in defensive rebounding, which when you compare Boston and Maine, Boston's elite defensive rebounding, and they're middle of the pack towards the top 10 in offensive rebounding. That's a key differentiator. They both teams shoot threes, both teams guard, both teams go in the post, both teams move the ball. The assist numbers for Boston have been skyrocketing the last 10 or so games. So this team shares the ball. Any given night, someone can have a night. JD might have a night. Stewart might have a night. Peterson could be the guy. But I would also add, keep an eye on the defensive rebounding. And that comes down to teams just not having career shooting nights, which has happened to them. Big guys have had career shooting nights against them, and that drives the team crazy. But defensive rebounding is something else, too, that they've continued to improve on here in the back end. 14 games to go. 10 are on the road. There are 4 more home games that you can come watch the Maine Celtics at the Expo. Last Sunday of February, Westchester comes to town. That's a 1 o'clock start, and then 3 games in March, 2 with Greensboro and 1 with Westchester. One of those Greensboro games is actually on St. Patrick's Day, so you want to be sure to get your tickets very soon. That'll be a good take. Tough ticket to get. St. Patrick's Day, the green, the nostalgia. 2 o'clock start against Greensboro. St. Patrick's Day should be a good one.
Hey, if anybody out there is watching this right now and sees this, that St. Patrick's Day game, if you got a ticket, that should be the craziest atmosphere of the season. There's no excuses on that one. We've had some good ones. Even last night, the crowd was great, but you come in on St. Patrick's Day, I mean, that's kind of like a New Year's Eve game. You better come in and be loud, because that's one of the things that's an X factor when Maine plays at home. Nobody gets that. There's not a lot. Big crowds around the G League aren't a common thing. Come in and come out and get crazy at the Expo, because teams aren't used to that, and it's an advantage. Our team loves energy, and they build off that crowd energy.
And they'll miss it. I mean, going on the road to start the second half, Birmingham, then they come back and play Westchester, and then a 5-game trip, Delaware, Osceola, Wisconsin. They're going to need that kind of boost. And at that point, March 14th, when they are home to Greensboro, that's going to be basically that last part of the year, March 14th to the end of the month. Those are virtually all playoff games. So those are going to have playoff feel based on where Maine is in the standings. Can they get a home court playoff game? Can they just get into the playoffs? Should be good stuff. So be sure to get your tickets at MaineCeltics.com. Thanks to Joe Goodrich, our producer behind the scenes. For Chris Whitney, Brendan Glasheen. Thanks again also to Jarell Christian for joining us on episode 6 of the Maine Celtics podcast. You all deserve a break too. Enjoy the All-Star break, and we'll talk to you all very soon on the Maine Celtics podcast.